programs that weren't strictly news.
Let's go to Capitoline Hill and Harry Marble.
The most famous was a show that actually started on radio.
I was thinking how fortunate
built on the conceit that our CBS correspondents could cover the great events of history.
Senator Fabius, how do you stand on Caesar's legislative program?
My father was a slave. Today I'm a senator in Rome.
We called it You Are There, and it had a good long run, over 4 years.
I was right.
We burned Joan of Arc at the stake. We sank the Titanic. We fired the first shot at Fort Sumter.
Just a moment now. We do have our unit at the Biograph Theater now. Let's switch there. Harry Marble reporting.
The first 2 years were done live from New York.
Mr. Brown.
Since we aired on Sundays, when many Broadway plays were dark, we got a lot of fine actors. They were eager to learn a bit about this new thing called television.
Are you sure it's Dillinger?
No comment.
Why did you let him go into the theater?
No comment.
Isn't it dangerous to take Dillinger in a public place like this? He won't surrender, whatever the odds.
No comment.
Cronkite had a feeling for actors, and he joined in with us quite often. I read somewhere once that he made a remark that he, at one time, thought that he might have liked to have been a song and dance man.
Walter Cronkite reporting. The date is October 12th, 1492.
If Cronkite had been bitten really hard by the acting bug, it might have gone that way.
For if the Genoese mariner is successful, he will establish as undeniable fact the new and still bitterly contested theory that the world is not flat, but round. What sort of day was it? A day like all days, filled with those events that alter and illuminate our times. And you were there.
When we return, Cronkite remembers Ted Baxter.
Call me Walter.
Old Blue Eyes.
You make me feel so young.
I said, tell me, Frank, what about these allegations of mafia connections? Wham!
And the Beatles.
I think I just saw coming down that hall.
One of the major disagreements I had with my very dear friend and my much admired boss at CBS News, Dick Salamp,
Murray, him.
was when I got invited to appear on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. And he had this serious philosophic objection to anybody in the news area appearing on an entertainment show.
I think he's expecting me.
We argued about it, and he finally yielded.
Walter
Cronkite.
I went out, and I loved doing it.
Ted Baxter, Walter Cronkite.
It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Cronkite.
Call me Walter.
It was great fun.
I think we better get going.
Did you catch my award-winning newscast?
I'm afraid I didn't.
I remember most of it. Good evening, this is Ted Baxter.
The only problem with doing the show, for me, was that I wanted to hang around longer, and unfortunately, we did it in one take.
Well, what do you think, Walt?
I think I better be getting to the airport.
I'll go with you. I'll give you the rest of the news on the way.
It's going to get you for this.
Cronkite Remembers will return in a moment.
The first Americans are already here in Boston.
Appealing to voters who are...
Good evening, everyone.
The modern age came to television reporting of elections in 1952.
General Eisenhower is leading in 15 states with a total
Remington Rand had developed this huge device that we called a mechanical brain or electronic brain.
UNIVAC, can you tell us what your prediction is now on the basis of the returns that we've had so far?
From that beginning, I never was particularly comfortable, even up to the last elections that I did, with electronic predictions. It just seemed wrong to me to sit back and say that on a very few votes you could determine who was going to win an election. And it turns out, of course, you can. According to our CBS News estimate, President Nixon has been reelected. I've met all of America's presidents since Herbert Hoover. and I've known some of them pretty well. Eisenhower I knew somewhat in Europe during the war, and I was impressed, like everybody else, with his military role. But when Ike came to be president, I was one of those who joined in the common wisdom of the moment among White House correspondents that Ike wasn't really clued into all that was going on in the White House there. He kind of ran it as a staff organization like the military. Well, I was totally disabused of that idea when we at CBS did his memoirs. He seemed to know about everything that took place in that administration of his.
A number of congressional committees and so on like to get...
Then in 1964, we did a program which had to be one of the great privileges of all time.
Walter, this D-Day has a very special meaning for me.
I got to go back to Normandy with General Eisenhower to review the D-Day invasion of France that had taken place 20 years before.
General, the fact that that storm came in on June 19th sort of proves the wisdom of going on the 6th, doesn't it?
Well, at least it proves we were lucky, Walter.
Mrs. Eisenhower grabbed Betsy's hand and said, "My dear, is Ike going to drive?" And she said, "Well, it certainly looks like it." And she said, "Oh, my dear, your husband has never been in greater danger. He hasn't driven in 25 years, and then he didn't drive very well." I liked Kennedy, as nearly everybody did.
One of the candidates for the office of the presidency.
But I felt at the same time there was a kind of an arrogance there that bothered me a great deal. In that 1960 election, I wanted to do separate broadcasts interviewing Kennedy and Nixon.
With a record of Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Nixon went first.
We cannot have peace at any price.
Well, the following Sunday, we did Kennedy.
Our interview with the senator will be entirely unrehearsed.
How do you do, Senator? Well, I'm glad to see you.
And I asked him, what do you think are your special qualifications to make you available for the presidency? And he flubbed it.
Well, I think I've had a historical view of the United States.
He knew he'd flubbed it, and he kept insisting that we tape the interview over again.
Which was 8 years ago.
Well, I was really sore. I turned and I got halfway out of the room, and I looked back at him and said, "We'll do it again, Senator, but I want to tell you something. I think this is the lousiest bit of sportsmanship I've ever seen in my life." By the time I got to the door, he shouted, "Hey, wait a minute. Go ahead and run it." And we did.
Unfortunately, the religious issue has been brought out here. And
another time, Kennedy tried to get me taken off campaign coverage when I asked about his Catholicism as a political issue.
But I do think it's somewhat unwise to try to analyze the religion of the voters.
Senator went to see Frank Stanton, the president of CBS.
We always figured we'd have difficulty there.
And he threatened Frank Stanton by saying, "Don't forget, when I become president of the United States, I'm going to be naming the members of the Federal Communications Commission, which control the licenses of your stations." Which was direct blackmail. And Frank Stanton showed his courage then, as he has many times before and since, and said, "Well, I'm sorry about that." And nothing happened. I like Johnson. He, to me, was a typical hard-driving Texan, and having spent a good deal of my formative years in Texas, I appreciate that type.
The United States told the communists in unusually blunt language today.
He called the CBS Evening News while I was actually on the air and insisted that they put him through to me on the air. The secretary said, "But he's on the air, Mr. President." "I don't give a damn where he is. Put him on the phone." I think his domestic legislation will live in history, civil rights legislation particularly. His problem, of course, was Vietnam. It brought him down and has forever tinged his record in the history books.
President Nixon arrived here in Manila about...
I think history will judge Richard Nixon favorably for his